Paige. It's so good to have you.
Hi, Crystal. It's really good to be here.
So, if you don't know, Paige Rosales she's my consultant on all things children's book related, educationally related, as well as my content editor and also a copy editor. And we have a really interesting process of how we work together on these books because I just had a story in my head and I just want to write stories. And Paige is the one that gives me like terms and vocabulary to what these stories really are and helps me to navigate this world and from kind of something abstract to something real. And one of the things from the first story, the way it turned out, Paige would tell me this isn't a regular typical children's book. This is children's literature. This is quality children's literature. And I sort of understood what you meant by that, Page, and I sort of didn't. And the way I do things in life is it's okay if I don't completely understand because I know that along the way I will figure it out. And part of my figuring it out was watching YouTube videos because as I was going into more schools and going to fairs and bazaars and selling my books, and I would get these questions. I would use your words of children's literature and trying to understand what that really means. And so I would, and I apologize for the background noise. I would like to ask you, Paige, could you give a really good description as far as what is children's literature and what makes that different from a typical children's book?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, first of all, Crystal, working with you is one of the great joys in my life. I'm going to tell your people who I am so they care. Like, who's this chick? We're glad Crystal's got friends.
Yeah.
The reason I know about children's literature is that I've had over 35 years in early childhood education and child development. So I've done all the jobs. I started out as the NAP teacher, which was a horrible job because I came and I saw the children and I was happy and they said, "Oh, the NAP teacher's here." Oh, and I've been a director and a trainer. I've worked in elementary school classrooms, childcare facilities. I've had a wonderful career. Currently, I've recently retired from that, and I'm a transformational coach. I lead retreats, and I teach yoga, but I'm a spellcaster. So I work with words in a way that really helps to draw out the essence of something. And so I'm going to talk about your books and what it's meant for me as a spellcaster, as somebody who really works with authors, and or anybody who needs copy, really, to take an idea and make it kind of, in my mind, what it was meant to be in the world, its full self. So, yes, literature versus a good book. So when we look at when you go to a bookstore, people, you can find everything from a book for $5, and you can spend, I don't know, you can spend $40 on a children's book. And we're talking about children's books in the elementary range. So let's say, um, just for the sake of argument, 3 through 8, although I would argue that your books continue into adulthood. And I'll explain some of that, but that's a wide range. And let's just say that each of those books is worth that amount of money, that those are fair prices for them. And what does that mean? So there are really cute children's books. Some of them are books that tell and retell and star again, characters that are important in children's lives. Let's say characters that they meet in movies or television. And so these books may just be a cute story. Very often, though, these books are readers. So they're books that children at a particular level can approach. These books typically have what we call controlled vocabulary. Dr. Seuss is a famous one for controlled vocabulary. The challenge of Hop on Pop was to take these few words and make a full-length children's book, and of course he did, and the rest they say is history. Very children who are early readers can read those books. So a lot of times when we find children's books, they're leveled. They're leveled to give adults a clue as to whether the child can approach and engage with this book independently. Some of these books have deep and compelling stories. Some of these books, many of them, are books that children might return to over and over again because they can read it themselves, or they like the characters, but the conversations that come from these books are not typically terribly deep. This is just to be very clear. These are generalizations. This is not always true. But generally speaking, it's why as a teacher, I suggested that parents spend a lot of time in the library and be very selective about the books that they spent money on, because these kinds of books are books that children cycle through pretty quickly. Now, children's literature, whether they are books with one word or no words or many words, are books that are intellectually engaging for children in a wide variety of developmental places, and books that children want to return to again and again and again and again and again. Very often, children's literature are books that children can't access. Children of a particular age, let's say that the 4 through 8 set, can't engage in independently, or not as successfully, let's say with the 8-year-olds, as they could with an adult, because these are books that ask for conversation. They present ideas that are novel for kids, that expand their vocabulary, for example, expand their life experience. And so these books are books that are kind of cornerstones, in my opinion, books that we want to build children's libraries on, because these are the books that they're going to return to over and over and over again. They're going to discover new things every time they're read. Now, and so I'm going to, I've talked a lot, so I'm noticing that maybe you have a question or comment. Yes.
And so when you say that they are not necessarily independently going to look at the books, you mean that they would need
Read.
the adult to read it to them,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they could get the books and look at the pictures. What I noticed when I was a child, if the book had really pretty illustrations, even if I couldn't read the words, I would pick up the book and look at the illustrations and make up my own story.
Yes.
And that was the memory I had when I wanted the illustrations to be really intense. And so my
Yeah.
vision was like, because I was alone a lot, I didn't always have a grown up to reach me. And so I had to entertain myself. And going back to those memories, I wanted a book for a child who could entertain themselves with the pictures,
Mm-hmm.
even if they couldn't read. And I think that's
Absolutely.
also a part of a reading step, isn't it? To for kids as they're learning is to make up their own words.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an early it's an early stage of pre-literacy, is to engage with books, to kind of know where the beginning is, to flip through, to look at the pictures, to make up stories. And I have to say, okay, so I mentioned that there's really excellent quality children's literature that are wordless. The one that comes to mind right this minute is The Snowman, which may have 1 or 2 words in it. I don't remember, but basically it's this tiny illustration of of a fantasy experience, that like a dream state experience that a child has with a snowman friend. Just beautiful. No words. By the same token, your books have these very detailed pictures, complex, lots of things going on, emotion, um, sort of delight, fun little things to discover all through the books. That was true for Hope is a Butterfly, and it's the same for Vacuum Monster. Just delightful. Definitely books that children will return to over and over again on their own, just to get lost in the pictures. I did the same thing when I was small. I would get lost in the pictures. And your illustrator, Kat, is a genius. They're so beautiful.
Agreed.
They're just so beautiful.
Mhm. Mhm.
I always cry when I see the illustrations the first time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So children can and do engage in in quality children's picture books in that way. And I think I've told you this before, but there's been some conversation that children's books today are like the Catholic Church was 400 years ago. Back then, the church was paying the illustrators like Michelangelo to do beautiful work. Now, brilliant artists can be seen publicly through children's literature. And Kat is definitely someone to pay attention to. Her illustrations are phenomenal, and the two of you work together with such there's just such magic when you come together. She really gets your characters, and yeah, I look at them. I just go through the books to see how beautiful they are and to look at the illustrations.
Mhm.
Now the other part of that is the part where kids need or would really benefit from being with an adult.
Mhm.
I think about some of the more traditional children's books from the olden days. Some people may be familiar with Make Way for Ducklings, for example, which is a story of Mr. and Mrs. Mallard trying to find a place for their baby ducks, and they end up in Boston. And it is a charming book. Eloise is another one. Amazing illustrations, complex storylines with big words. I know that when you were first writing your books and friends were reading them, people said, Crystal, I think this vocabulary is too big for kids. And I knew in my heart that children need access to complex vocabulary, that children learn complex vocabulary from reading it, from interacting with the words. Some of the things that you do in your books help kids to decode those words because of the context that you build in. And sometimes kids will have questions. One of the things that I've done as a teacher is really engage with kids in finding words they don't know and asking about them, being a collector of new words, because of course language is power, and they getting building their vocabulary is a way for children to build their intelligence, but also build their ability to communicate, which is a powerful thing. So
Mhm.
yeah, your books are doing lots of good stuff out there in the world.
And what I notice, because I have people say, well, what is the age range? And I will say
Mm.
preschool to fifth grade. And it is all of those ranges. And what I noticed going into the classrooms is the kindergartner classes were just as engaged. And I don't tell me if this is what was happening. As I was reading the story, they were very engaged. And the way I do the story is I memorize it. They have a book or someone's holding the book and turning the pages or it's on the screen behind me. And I'm kind of acting out the characters and making eye contact. And when I would stop and have discussions, the kids were very engaged with the story, but some of the concepts the kindergartners didn't really know what was going on. But it
Mhm.
seemed to me that there were kind of stories within the story and they could kind of get the gist of it. And even though they didn't know exactly what was happening in this particular piece, collectively throughout the whole story, there was enough that they could get these little mini stories inside the story. And that's kind of what I felt like was happening because I would ask them, what does this mean? Like they didn't really know what this was going on. So I would explain the concept, but they were getting that the caterpillar said that the chrysalis, and they thought that was really cool. So they were
Mhm.
getting the different pieces. And so even though they didn't get every single thing that was happening throughout the entire book, there were these little pieces that even a little piece of itself could make up a story that satisfied that story hunger for them. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It totally makes sense to me. And I think it speaks again to the difference between quality literature and a fun book. Now,
Mhm.
you know, most of us as adults have pleasure reads. It may be mystery, it may be fantasy, it may be romance. And some of those are deep books that we'll return to over and over again, finding things in them that we didn't before, life lessons, nuance of character, just an amazing story that we want to relive in our spirit. And some of them were like a really good one off, and then we're done.
Mhm.
Um, what you're talking about is is a book or books, because now you're going on number two,
Mhm.
books that are layered and that can there's a lot to be gotten out of your books. There's a simple story of In Hope, which many of your listeners may be familiar with. There's a simple story of friendship and kindness, and that's a kindergarten idea.
Mhm.
Hope was in danger. They made friends. She had a hard time. They stuck by her, and yay, they're friends now.
Mhm.
Or um, being nice to people, even no matter what they look like, no matter what kind of shoes they wear to school. These are very kindergartner concepts. And then there are fifth grade, middle school, even high school ideas and adult ideas, which I will point to, which are what it feels like to be in a really challenging life event and wanting to avoid it, be rescued from it, just do something other than the hard thing I have before me. And then friends learning how to support us when we are really in a period of growth in our lives. Now, I would, well, okay, I would argue this, but so would our friend Janelle, who teaches middle and high school, and uses picture books in her middle and high school classes, not because they're babies, but because these are delicious snippets of life that can be absorbed and broken down literarily, socially, emotionally, and they're beautiful. And who doesn't like to be read to? Podcasts, people being read
Right.
to.
And audibles, right? I go through my audibles. I love being read to. And it's interesting, we're kind of going back to Hope, the first book. I was listening to, of course, I love Simon Sinek. If you're out there, Simon Sinek, I got a big crush on you. But
Say who you have a big crush on again?
Simon Sinek and
Oh,
Malcolm
got it.
Gladwell as well. They're kind of both
Okay.
in the running together. But he was doing an interview on YouTube and he was talking about a big part of it was talking about friendship and going to your friends for help. And he said, what a lot of friends fail to do is just be with you in the mud. A lot of times you go to friends for help, they want to fix it. And he said, that's not helpful. He goes, most of the time when we are struggling, we want someone to sit with us in the mud and be with us, let us cry, let us have the pain and be in it with us. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's talking about hope. He needs to read my book. But and I got that from working with people, working with the high school kids. They want to rescue you. It's like, no, it's not about rescuing someone. You need to be with them. Because if you rescue them, you're enabling, that could lead to all kinds of problem behaviors like addiction. But also letting them know that they can do it and just be with them. And that was what happens in that story, which is an adult concept because apparently, according to Simon Sinek, adults can't do that. And we
Yeah,
know that a lot of times, like a lot of times we have those friends that want to solve problems for us, and we find ourselves, I find myself wanting to solve the problem. Oftentimes I have to
absolutely.
step back and go back into, this is helpful, really.
I mean, Crystal, I'm doing some new and big things in my own life. I'm building a business. I'm kitting out a van to do some traveling and to connect with some people whom I've met over my 35 years, well, 22 years overseas, 35 years in the world, in the professional world. And I've had many more than 35 years in this world. And and yesterday I had a moment. I just had one of those, I'm overwhelmed. This is too much. And I don't, yeah, I mean, I know this stuff. I've worked through a lot of things, but when we're in it, sometimes we too need the reminder from Hope that actually this is the reminder from Vacuum Monster. Uh we can handle it. We have the skills to handle it. We might want to reach out to a friend to be there with us, but not to rescue us. And we can do this. You are absolutely right. These are life lessons. I guarantee that if you are an adult reading these books to children, you are going to go either, oh, right, because you've needed a little reminder, or, oh, I think I'm going to try it that way next time. These are these are beautiful books. In some ways, very simple books. The characters are charming. They're precious. I'm in love with them. They're adorable. Simple characters, but offering big ideas and big life skills to manage the world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, my sister-in-law, who's from Bulgaria, her cousin he's from Denmark. Um, so I mean, not even, he's from Denmark. And I have the people who've been the beta readers. Everybody says the same thing. These are actually for grown-ups too. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, that's clever. And my mind, I thought, well, that would be helpful for some parents who need a little bit of, skills as well, that they would get benefit secondarily. And realizing that it's universal. We all could use those reminders,
We all
even
need
about the
them.
courage,
Yeah.
one of the Brene Brown's quotes that I love, and I love Brene Brown too, talks about you can have comfort or courage, but you can't have both.
Yes.
And just because we think of people as courageous doesn't mean that they don't feel uncomfortable or fear or nervous or stress.
Yeah.
They just muddle through it too.
Absolutely. And Crystal, I
Mhm.
will say, as someone who's taught people and raised people,
Mhm.
um, having having the story, having characters whom we love, a story that we've read together more than one time, probably, when things come up, it's very different to say, okay, now let's remember, which as a parent or a teacher, we
Mhm.
sometimes do. We're just trying to cut to the chase, right? Versus saying, oh, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of that situation that Gracie was in. Remember in the book? And then the kid goes, oh, yes. Now we're out of our panic brain. We're into remembering a time when we were calm, when we were exploring, and
Mhm.
and the child connects to access with a skill that was intellectually rehearsed in a period of calm, in a period slightly outside of myself, with compassion for other. And then from there, having the adult and the child work through, like, regulating emotion, choosing a different way. It's just, it's different. And the books are powerful. It helps kids and it helps adults remember that kids can do these skills.
Yeah. And it does, even though they're whimsical, I think that's what Jazz Lenny calls them, whimsical and funny. And they have that, but they have the deepness in it that kind of is snuck in there because there's the neuroscience piece of it, that when we have a strong emotional attachment to something and where you have characters that you identify with and
Mhm.
that you like, and then there's fun, which is the whimsical piece, when there's fun involved in it, then you're when there's connection, and it could be a pretend connection, a connection with the character, or a connection with the person reading it to you, which is always so much better. But that doesn't, not everybody has access to a grown up that reads to them. That's just the truth.
It
But
is the truth.
when you have that connection, that your body releases the oxytocin,
Mhm.
and then you have the dopamine, which is the fun, and the serotonin, all of these chemicals that are going into your brain, and that sticks in that part of your same part of your brain that, like, where trauma is stuck. And trauma is not, it's, I would say, bad sticky, not fun sticky, but this is good sticky. So it is stuck in there. So then when, like what you're talking about, when you need access to that information, then you kind of have this recall of a character that, oh, Gracie, I like her. And she, she's kind of silly and she could do it, so I can do it too. And remind you that you're not alone, that these struggles are universal.
Absolutely. And to get back to the illustrations, because the story plus the illustrations create that deep character connection that is delightful.
Mhm.
They're adorable. I mean, 4-year-olds play dog and cat, and they play puppy, and they want to be in the puppy bed and eat their food off the floor. And then 8 and 9-year-olds buy the animal books, whether they are fiction stories about puppies and kittens, or whether they're animal books about wild animals, kids who are more interested in nonfiction.
Mhm.
um, these characters are deeply, deeply lovable. They are complex, they are interesting, and Cat brings the silly, the worry, the sad, the love and affection, the deep delight. She brings those to life in these
Yes.
characters. So
You can look
you're
at
not
them.
kidding.
Mhm.
Yes, you are not kidding. Just looking at these illustrations, you can fall in love with these characters.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that you were telling me is like, oh, you did lesson planning, because you're like, I do these things, and like, and then you put the words to them. When I went to a school, it was a tougher school. It was a community where there's just these kids are dealing with a lot of stuff, and so oftentimes they come to the classroom in a way, and they're more street smart, and like I knew, like, this little children's book is not going to go over well with these fourth graders and fifth graders because it's the end of the school year and they're not going to show up
They're
in
not
that
babies.
vulnerable state. They're not going to be
Uh-huh.
vulnerable enough to in front of their peers because it was a large group. And so what I did is I took this story. I did Braveheart Gracie, which is all about fear, rational fear and irrational fear. And I think I did several of the illustrations only.
Mm.
And we talked about the illustration, like, what is this picture telling you? How are you getting how does it make you feel a certain, and they say, oh, it looks scary. It's like, what is it about this illustration, this artwork that makes it scary? So we really
Mhm.
did this whole thing as an art appreciation and art, I call it art appreciation, there may be a more sophisticated way to say it. And then also talked about how you do, I told them, I have my content editor that says, I would submit something to you, Paige, and like, show me, don't tell me. And I would tell them, I go, she would send it back to me. And so I did it in the context of decoding art
Mhm.
and writing and didn't read it as a story. I acted out the first story real quick. I'm just going to give you the so that you understand the characters. They got the lessons because at the end I said, I want you to draw me a picture of your irrational fear that you have. The kids drew me pictures of things that are pretty darn scary that I would say
Mhm.
are rational fears, things going on in their life
Irrational.
that's pretty scary
Yeah.
and pretty dangerous. So that told me they got it. And
Mhm.
I think that's what you were explaining to me. That's what literature does and how teachers could use this. I think you called it an anchor text because it could, because it
Absolutely.
is socially emotional learning, but you can also use it for different pieces of lessons.
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
everything from um like it in most school districts, there is a literature standard that has to do with what value does illustration, um, tables, uh, photographs, etc., um, add to your reading. And of course, with nonfiction, it's going to be more charts and graphs, and with literature, it's going to be more of the illustration thing. But that's actually a standard. So you were hitting on a
Mm,
literature standard when you were teaching that. You can approach these books with there's a tremendous amount of dialogue. There are complicated there's complicated sentence structure.
mhm,
Um, really, even in middle school and high school, your books could be used for hunting non-standard sentence structure. So what I mean by that is that you're using semicolons, you're using colons, you're using clauses, um, you use adjective phrases. So like whether you're doing grammar or grammar and punctuation or sentence or story structure or whatever it is that people are teaching in literature, there is a place to bounce off from your stories, from your books. They're extremely rich. And yes, and an anchor text is something that you would go back to again and again over the course of a week, or over the course of
mhm,
time, for examples or to launch different lessons from. And your books are really, really good at that.
mhm,
I mean, I've joked that the one thing that your books don't have is rhyming. And that's okay, because many children's books rhyme.
mhm,
We didn't need it. You didn't need to write another rhyming book. Other people are
mhm,
doing that, and
mhm,
that's good.
mhm,
But the books that you're writing are rich. They are rich, rich reading and literacy experiences for pre-literate and extraordinarily literate people alike.
mhm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you talked about before the initial revision was I never thought about this, but your sister was an actress and you've acted in plays and you're a good actress. You said this would be a great play. And I didn't even really notice that as I write, it is more dialogue than anything.
Yeah.
And Braveheart Gracie would be a great play. And I think in my mind, coming from the social worker therapist perspective, when the kids act out these characters and they become the characters, then that would even move the social emotional skills and probably even the academic skills to another level because then they become the character. Like, what does it feel like to be Gracie and scared?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like to be Charlie, who is scared, but also is dependent upon to be the wise one, but also
Right.
has his own wounding that he's working through himself. And then Princess Penelope, who's a sassy cat that is afraid to show her vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I think they would make just delightful. Like if I were teaching in a classroom these days, I might have that as a possible either just in class readers theater kind of experience, I actually would definitely do that. But really doing a classroom production or even a school or community theater production, I mean, in your spare time, Crystal, you could really you could more turn these into actual scripts, but really just to take them and to do a readers theater or a school production with a narrator and the characters would be it's easy because that's how they're written. They are written
Mhm.
in deep dialogue between characters.
I think that would be fun. And I know I was going to try to keep it to 30 minutes, but when you and I start talking, it goes on and on and on. But what I did want to say is that for the grown-ups, that each book has these guides that help prompt you, like that we write, you and I write them together, that they're an additional part of the book, so that if you want to have the social emotional learning prompts or the science pieces or the big ideas, they are an accompanying piece of the book that really helps.
And I think that that's helpful. I think that that's helpful for teachers just to get some ideas,
Hmm.
like a quick glance of, oh, right.
Hmm.
And then it's a place to jump off. For newer teachers or maybe parents or grandparents, aunts and uncles, people who care for little ones. Um, these are good guides to kind of help you find your own voice. And once you see what we're talking about, how to
Hmm.
focus in on an idea, and really one idea per reading. It's not like there are hundreds of ways to come at this. So you choose one idea that maybe you want to explore with the kid. You enjoy the story, you talk a little bit about what makes you feel afraid. That's it this time. And then the next time you read it together, you talk about fears that are logical fears and fears that are made up fear, like, fears that, as Charlie says, false evidence appearing real. Um, but using these guides will, in my opinion, help you find your voice. So you won't have to read the book with the guide forever. The guide will help you to go, oh, that's what they're talking about when they say using these as an anchor text or using these to jumpstart a social emotional conversation.
Right. Um, do you have a favorite part of Vacuum Monster?
Uh,
And the whole
um,
title is Braveheart Gracie, the Vacuum Monster, so it's
Braveheart
not
Gracie, yeah,
confusing. They're not two
yeah,
different books. Yeah.
that's right. These are not two different books. Braveheart Gracie and the Powerless Vacuum
Hmm.
Monster. Um, oh, do I have a favorite part? I love the whole thing so much. The end cracks me up. My belly laughing cracks me up. But I think there's a part toward the beginning. I'm gonna get all like misty when Gracie is really afraid. She's
Hmm.
really afraid. And she's asking Charlie, she's worried for Charlie, but she's worried for herself and she's scared for her whole family group. And she's got her paw or paws on Charlie's chest and she's asking him, she wants to believe that she doesn't need to be terrified, and yet she can't be convinced. She
Hmm.
just needs reassurance. And to me, that part jump starts the deep dive that we take into our emotions. And I just think it's so beautiful. I just think that little part right there is so precious. And I love that little dog. And
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
she
so that,
is because she is terrified.
yeah,
And I think the important piece is that she's never not afraid. And that's the
yes,
whole thing is that she's afraid until the very end, until she
yes,
realizes. that it was okay. And
Yes,
she's trying, she's being courageous, she's being brave, she's following the steps, but throughout the whole thing, she's still afraid.
agreed. And I think it's important because it's not an easy fix. It's not a 20-minute sitcom where you have a problem and you solve it. It really takes the journey,
Mhm.
and they do it together, which I love.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's not an easy fix. And Charlie even says, I have make believe fears all the time, and it's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah,
What I This came out later when we were doing our revisions because there's rational fear and irrational fear. And what I did not want is for children to read this book and to have that spidey sense that something is off, that this person, and I'm just going to use this as an example, but there's a lot of things that I could use as an example. This person that I'm supposed to trust looks safe. I don't feel like I'm in
yeah,
danger, but we all
yes,
know that it's those oftentimes the people that we trust, whether we're adults or children, that
true.
are not safe. And we have this spidey sense where I shouldn't have gone to that party. I shouldn't have gotten into the car with those people. I shouldn't have walked down that street. And so I wanted a little piece in there that reminded them when it's fuzzy, when it's not clear, that there's a spidey sense, there's an intuition sense, there's a feeling that you get that's uncomfortable and it's not always clear, and that you need to gather more information sometimes.
Yeah.
Because irrational fear, it's not black and white and it's not simple.
And we are quick to say it's irrational because we haven't learned to take our own fears seriously. And I actually, that's one of the things that it's one of the things that I love about this book, about these books, is that they don't gloss over, they go deep. And I actually wanted to tell you something because we've talked about the length, particularly of this book, and that
Mm.
your older kids were saying, Miss Cook, you need to make these chapter books. These
Yeah,
books are
this
long
is a long
because
book. Yeah.
they're not 12 pages, they're not 24 pages, they're not a quick read.
Mm.
These are books that you will want to maybe read part of, put a bookmark in, and come back tomorrow. If you are looking for the quick bedtime escape, do not pick up Braveheart Gracie and the Powerless Vacuum Monster. That is not your quick bedtime read. This
Oh.
is a Saturday afternoon read. This is a
Mm.
let's read a little bit tonight and talk about it in a little bit tomorrow. And this, you could read this over 3 to 5 bedtimes. Um,
Absolutely.
I looked it up. You are not alone, my friend.
And
Many,
she's yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just going to interject
many,
real quick.
oh,
And she's saying this, Paige. For all of you out there, Paige is saying this because I go like, Paige, this book is 72 pages long. And
okay.
granted, half of it is text and half of it's illustration, but the text page is really long. There's a lot of text in there. And
So,
I was like, is this going to be too long? And so this
no.
is where Paige. And so then go ahead, Paige it. Hey,
No,
where you left off.
one of my favorite children's books, which I have referenced before, is Make Way for Ducklings. Make Way for Ducklings has a tremendous amount of text and lovely pen and ink illustrations. They're just black and white illustrations. 72 pages. I haven't looked up the Francis books, but wildly popular. Longer stories that take a while to dive into and develop over time, with big ideas and and complex thinking involved. So
Mhm.
you are not alone. There is quality children's literature that exists in the world that are longer reads, that are reads that the adults who are sharing these with are going to make sure that that we're connected to.
Mhm.
Now, I am afraid that I have to go. We're going to need to
Right to
keep
that.
this 40 minutes or however long we've gone on.
Yeah. So Paige, you talked a little bit about some of the magic that you are giving to the world. Is there a place where people can find you?
Absolutely. So I don't have a website, but I do have a Calendly link, which I can send to you and people can click underneath.
Mhm.
So just really quickly, um, I am a fierce keeper of dreams. Crystal had a dream of being an
Mhm.
author, and I was not your coach, but I certainly championed your dream. And now look at you. I didn't do that. You did that. I want to be very clear. I don't make people's dreams come true. Poof.
Oh,
I
you kind of did. You know, I was like, I'll write a little story.
but we all have something inside that's ready to come out, whether it's a career or a hobby or just a passion or a curiosity. And so I work with people who are ready to explore that little dream that keeps whispering in the ear, that wants to come out. Maybe it's tap dancing, and the thought of tap dancing is terrifying because I don't know, you're 70 years old. I don't know. It could be that. If that's you, give me a call. So they can click in my Calendly link and just we'll chat. I just want to talk to people, and we'll see what's up. And I want to hear what's going on in your life, and then we can talk about whether working together would be a good fit. But these are connection calls, and so we want to see if there's a good connection between us. And I want my folks that I talk to connect with that deeper part of themselves that's whispering to show their little heads.
Yeah, and I've loved working with you, Paige. I think you said something the other day. It's like I think there's gonna come a time when you want to, go out your own. And my eyes like, no, it's like because you're so solid. You tell me what I need to hear. You don't mince words. You're kind, but you're also very grounded because I can tend to and you bring me down and okay, and a good voice of reason, but also tells me what I need to hear and doesn't let me take shortcuts and, reminds me of my process. And yeah, it's just been incredible. You just have so much wealth, so much wisdom and experience and a wealth of knowledge that I don't have.
Thank you, my
It's
friend.
been invaluable.
Thank you, my friend. It is such
Mhm.
a joy to do this together, to be on this
Mhm.
adventure together.
It's been fun.
Absolutely.
It's been fun. Some
Yeah.
tears when we talk about certain characters and what may happen to them and laughs and yeah. So
It's
I know you need to go. So it's been so much fun
so
catching up with
much
you.
fun. All right. I love you, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, take care.
Ciao.
Oops.